100 miles up the Persian coast from Halicarnassus stood the largest marble temple ever constructed. It had been built at Ephesus, the wealthiest city in Asia Minor and the largest port on the Aegean. The temple, dedicated to the goddess Artemis, attracted pilgrims who flocked here to visit her cult shrine. Artemis was a mother goddess, her many breasts symbolizing the fertility of women. King Croesus, renowned for his wealth, financed the building of a temple to her in 550 BC. The architect chosen to build it was Chersiphron. Although he was highly trained in temple construction, this commission was on a scale never before attempted.
One of the interesting things about temples, such as the temple at Ephesus, are that they are among the earliest works of Greek architecture on any real scale.
Chersiphron may well have visited the temples of Thebes in Egypt and been inspired by the forests of columns there. His temple of Artemis would be built entirely from marble and have 126 giant columns. Chersiphron's first challenge was to ensure a constant supply of enormous blocks of marble. The quarries were 7 miles from the construction site, and some marble blocks could weigh as much as 40 tons. Engineer Scott Steedman has examined the difficulties of moving them.
There's a lot of controversy about how the ancients moved heavy stones. We know that they dragged them, of course, but when you drag a stone, you have to overcome a huge amount of friction from the weight of the stone on its runners underneath. So if you want a system that doesn't involve dragging, then you may be able to rock them, or even to roll them. This is a mock-up of a rocking device where the stone is strapped in between 2 large wooden rockers. This is a very efficient system of overcoming friction, and you can see just how easy it is to move even a heavy object. You could maneuver it, you could spin it, you could pull it up a ramp with considerably fewer men than if you were trying to drag it.
Chersiphron's methods of moving stone were highly advanced. He invented an ingenious roller pulled by oxen.
The circular column elements were simply rolled along the ground within a frame pulled by oxen. But the rectangular elements were, of course, a rather more difficult proposition, and some of these were enormous. I mean, the largest of the architraves was nearly 9 meters long, which is an enormous block of stone. And to move that, he encased the ends in timberwork and turned them into wheels, and then simply attached draft animals to them and pulled them along.
The temple measured a vast 180 by 360 feet, almost twice the size of the Parthenon. It was surrounded by a double row of columns, 60 feet high. One of the biggest problems was lifting up the giant lintels to the column tops.
Stones like these weigh as much as 5 to 10 tons apiece. So how did the ancient Greeks lift such enormous weights to the top of a temple? We know that in ancient Egypt, they used a form of cantilever crane called a shadoof to lift water. And we know that the ancient Greeks used the same principle, but on a much larger scale, to lift weights at the dockside, cargo and even ships. So we can imagine that it's entirely possible that they used the same type of cantilever crane inside the temple, perhaps mounted on a mound of earth and stone, so that they could build up a platform halfway up the temple to give them the leverage they would need to reach right to the top.
Unlike earlier civilizations, Chersiphron's craftsmen had iron tools. This enabled the marble columns to be fluted and decorated, but it called for greater care in handling them.
One of the great difficulties of maneuvering these enormous blocks of stone is the precision that you need to get them finally into their exact place in the building. And you want techniques that can allow fine-tuning and allow little shifts of position and so on.
Chersiphron had to ensure the 40-ton marble lintels were placed in exactly the right positions, or the whole temple could collapse like a house of cards. He contemplated suicide when faced with lowering the final section. A similar problem had once confronted the ancient Egyptians when lowering a 60-ton sarcophagus down a 30-meter shaft. Their solution was simple.
They fill the shaft with sand, and they put the sarcophagus above the sand, and they cut a side shaft, and they take the sand from the side shaft, the sarcophagus will go down.
Chersiphron adapted this Egyptian technology to solve his problem.
One of the techniques Chersiphron used was to build a mound of sacks of sand, basically, and to put the architrave on that. And then by pulling away the sand at the base, the architrave is slipped slowly into position. And of course, this can be manipulated quite precisely and quite carefully.
The sand was let out of the bags, slowly lowering the stone into position. The Temple of Artemis took 50 years to build, and Chersiphron didn't live to see its completion. His son followed him to finish the construction. The temple became a massive tourist attraction. Then, on the night of Alexander the Great's birth, tragedy struck. On the night of Alexander the Great's birth, legend records that the goddess Artemis left the great temple to be with him. While she was away, a pyromaniac, wanting his name to be remembered forever, burned the temple to the ground.
In the year 356 BC, there was what the sources describe as a madman, Herostratus, who was, it says, consumed with the desire for glory, that his name should be remembered to the ends of time, on the ends of the earth. And he burnt the temple down.
The temple had a wooden roof and staircase. Once a falling beam had toppled a column, collapse was inevitable. Although the pyromaniac's name was erased from all records for his appalling crime, the word Herostraton has remained to describe infamy. But the Temple of Artemis had a second life. Within decades, it was rebuilt, becoming one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. During its reconstruction, Alexander the Great conquered every country around the eastern Mediterranean, bringing 2 ancient civilizations into the Greek Empire, Babylonia and Egypt.